Hello, my name is Gráinne and I'm Program Director for the Australian Institute of International Affairs here in Western Australia. It is my pleasure today to introduce Ms. Flávia Bellieni Zimmermann. Flávia is a teaching fellow and PhD candidate at the UWA School of Social Sciences in Political Science and International Relations. Flávia is also the commissioning editor for our online resource, Australian Outlook, and has published extensively. Welcome, Flávia.
Thank you, Gráinne.
So if you follow this series of video interviews, you'll recognise Flávia as the usual host. However, today we're reversing the roles, and Flávia will be talking us through some of the main points from her recent lecture, Brazil Ablaze, Understanding the Amazon Rainforest Fires. Thank you. So Flávia, we've heard a lot in the media recently about the Amazon's deforestation. Is this a new issue?
Well, Gráinne, that's a very good question because we need to take into context that Brazil has a vast geography and problems associated with the environmental degradation and the Amazon deforestation. They are not new issues. And on top of all this, Brazil is a country which experienced difficulties to enforce the rule of law. Historically, the Amazon deforestation and environmental degradation have been serious problems in Brazil. Having said that, in the 1990s, when particularly cattle farming starts in regions near what is regarded as the legal Amazon, when they start, there is a visible environmental impact, and there is growing awareness to the environmental damage caused by cattle farming and deforestation and environmental degradation in the Amazon. So in the 2000s, Brazil introduced very vanguard legislation to protect the environment. So let's say that over the last 20 years, Brazil had a very strong stand against deforestation, and they introduced mechanisms, particularly with Brazil Space Agency, where you can have satellite imagery and you can map out whether there is an increase in deforestation. So for about 20 years, Brazil was taking it very seriously, and we could see a change in the way this problem was being handled, and as a matter of fact, was being handled very effectively by the Brazilian government.
And what are some of the factors that have led to the current crisis?
Well, that's another interesting point. So what I argue is that with the global rise of populism, it contributes to the rise of the current president, who is far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. And it is interesting because Bolsonaro is a climate skeptic himself. And from the time he was running his presidential campaign, he argued that indigenous rights, environmental protections, and even human rights have paid a disservice to Brazilian society. And this we are talking about his presidential campaign platform. And he got elected in 2018, his first term in office, now 2019, and Bolsonaro has aggressively rolled back environmental protections and indigenous rights. And not only he's aggressively changing legislation, but even the legislation still in place of applying fines and trying to implement law and order in those regions, which I already mentioned. Historically, it has been difficult, but Brazil had a very strong stand to enforce the legislation and to inspect those areas. The inspections, according to reports, are not carried out. And we have increasing in illegal logging, in burning of forests, because there's a huge industry in Brazil of trade of this illegal, the produce of illegal logging, and on top of all this, indigenous communities that are suffering dramatically from Bolsonaro's rhetoric towards the environment and climate change, because he argues that not only Bolsonaro argues, but we need to take into consideration the people surrounding Bolsonaro, like the ideology, I dare to say, leading this administration. Our foreign minister, Ernesto Araújo, argues that climate change is a produce of Marxist ideology. And in addition to that, we have Bolsonaro's main political ideologue, self-proclaimed philosopher Olavo de Carvalho, who is anti-environmental protections, and he believes that climate change is a hoax. And on top of all this, he's very much anti-science, getting to the point of arguing that he questions whether the Earth goes around the sun. So it's a matter of great concern to think that this type of administration is currently running Brazil, and currently the people in charge of law enforcement regarding the environment.
Right, so the current fires, are they really as serious as they seem from the images that we have seen, and what are the things that could have been done to avoid the current disaster?
Thank you, Gráinne. Well, the fires are extremely serious, and as we speak, still not under control. And the question that we ask on top of all this is why they are not under control. And perhaps it is connected to what I was discussing previously. We have an administration which do not support environmental policies, do not believe in climate change, and they get to the point of even encouraging burnings by farmers at the height of the crisis. There is a difference between what is called the legal Amazon and non-legal Amazon. So the legal Amazon are the areas of preservation, and the non-legal Amazon are areas, as a matter of fact, extremely close to the legal Amazon, but not per se areas of environmental protection. And there are many private properties and cattle farms on those areas. And President Bolsonaro had the audacity, in the height of the fires, to enact a presidential decree where farmers could even burn more in their properties. But we need to take into consideration that, number one, we were in the dry season, there was already a fire taking place, and thirdly, it is very hard to control those fires. So it's an administration that doesn't seem to understand that even if you're a climate skeptic, if you damage ecosystems, this is a grade 5 type of, a lecture, a grade 5 primary school lecture on biology. We understand that ecosystems, when they are disrupted, the environmental impact is dramatic. And Bolsonaro doesn't seem to understand that. And his administration, regrettably, they are changing the legislation, so rolling back previous legislation, and even the legislation that is in place, they are not enforced. And even encouraging burnings by farmers. If the fires could have been prevented, in my opinion, by all means, they are very serious. They could have been prevented by a different narrative by the government, a narrative which understands the challenges of law enforcement in Brazil. Having said that, that would be looking after the environment in a responsible way, because according to the current administration, development or economic progress cannot go hand in hand with environmental protections, which is a great misperception, because what we need in Brazil is sustainable development, but the current administration, they see the world very much through black and white lenses, and it's interesting to go through their narratives that simply arguing that the environment deserves to be looked after. They would, label a person advocating this cause as perhaps, a historical Marxist. So, regrettably, it is an administration which polarized the political discourse and doesn't seem to understand how important it is environmental preservation in the world, and particularly for Brazil and for economic progress.
So you mentioned that Bolsonaro is quite a controversial figure. How has his presidency affected Brazil's standing in the international community?
Well, recently when we had the outbreak of fires, because it's a progression of measures taken by the Bolsonaro administration which led to the fires. And it's interesting because there was space imageries showing an increasing in illegal logging in the Amazon. And then Bolsonaro sacked the director of Brazil's space agency for releasing the data. So was building momentum towards a lot of controversy. And then we have a confirmation that there was a problem in that region with the outbreak of uncontrolled fires. The interesting fact leading to a wave of controversy regarding the fires and the way Bolsonaro handled the fires was when French President Emmanuel Macron publicly stated, and not only Macron, but also Angela Merkel, they stated their concern regarding the Amazon. Then we have the fires, and Emmanuel Macron, during a G7 meeting, mentioned that this is a matter of great concern because the Amazon they are the lungs of the earth, etc. But Bolsonaro felt extremely hurt for not being consulted previously, which is a matter of fact. I think ideally Bolsonaro should have been consulted before Macron went forward giving remarks on the Amazon. But having said that, the response of Bolsonaro and his administration was something which left the international community with their jaws dropped, because the fires in the Amazon and the fact that Bolsonaro, according to Macron, was not handling the fires appropriately, spilled into a personal dispute, and Bolsonaro got to the point of offending the French First Lady. There was a post on Facebook comparing the physical appearance of the French First Lady and the Brazilian First Lady, and Bolsonaro, in a very distasteful way, liked the post and still wrote a small comment making the French president a laughingstock. So it's interesting to see, because I argue that Bolsonaro has a very populist type of leadership. So there was already building controversy, and when the fires are something which you cannot dispute anymore, the information is released to the world press, the way he handled, I don't think was the best way a head of state should have handled. So he first sacks his director of the Brazil Space Agency, and not content with that, to build more controversy, he engaged in a personal dispute between wives with French President Emmanuel Macron. So regrettably, there is a lot of controversy.
Sure. So, Flavia, in your lecture you mentioned that you're an optimist at heart. How do you see the situation evolving in the short to medium term?
Well, I think we see many challenges in Brazil and in the world today. But having said that, we must be optimists, and I think we develop analysis, we understand history, and we try to think the way forward to current challenges. So when we see the fires in the Amazon, which, as mentioned before, are still not under control, on one hand, we have an administration that don't seem to be taking seriously the gravity of the problem and how it compromises Brazil's sustainable development. I argue that this can have devastating effects for Brazil and Brazil's future standing as a world leader. Having said that, we see the outcry promoted by the international community. We see that there is many evidence being shared on social media. International organizations and non-profit organizations are playing a big role in raising awareness on the problems taking place on the ground, and having leaders such as Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel from the early stages of the problem, signaling that there was an issue taking place, which later on was confirmed by evidence, shows us the role played by the international community in raising awareness and making sure that issues are followed through accordingly. And in the end of the day, Brazil is a country which needs business partners. And the fact that Bolsonaro and his administration are not handling the fires and the whole situation in the Amazon and environmental issues as expected by the global community, this could backfire in future trade agreements, in the way Brazil's political and economic leverage is assessed. So, in my opinion, the way forward would be the role played by international community as a check to a Brazilian president, which I regard as populist and regrettably without a vision towards environmental issues and climate change. And secondly, one thing, still talking about the international community, we are having Pope Francis. He's playing a big role in trying to check the whole Amazon crisis. We are going to have on the 27th of October a whole Vatican Synod on the Amazon. There is already a lot of information released by research done connected to the Vatican. So this research still needs to be scrutinized, and we still need more assessment regarding the data released by the Vatican. But the engagement of Pope Francis and the Vatican in the Amazon issue and the situation on the ground of indigenous communities that it is being argued are being pushed away from their reserves and suffering dramatically from a government which has no commitment with their cause. I think these are signs of hope. There are international players who can work together with environmental non-profit environmental organizations on the ground, and the voices of people who are being silenced, they still can be heard. And I think that's the way forward for environmental protections today in Brazil.
Well, thank you so much, Flávia, for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing your perspective on the current situation in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Gráinne. A pleasure being with you.
Now, if you'd like any more information, please go to our website, which is www.internationalaffairs.org.au. Thank you.